Vanquish, the action game from Shinji Mikami and Platinum Games, released last generation on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It's an amazing, highly technical action game with elements of cover-based shooting and almost like a modern take on something like Probotector, if you will. Years later, it was released on the PC, but now we have new console conversions of the game alongside Bayonetta. Once again, this is ported by Armature, and the results here are a little different than we saw with Bayonetta. So, to discuss that, I've brought back along Richard Ledbetter. Richard?
Hello there, John, and I'm really excited to see this one, and I'll tell you why. I mean, when we look back at the last console generation, what are the games that you really remember? You know, the ones that stick in your memory. And, we worked through hundreds of them back in the day, and this is one of the few games that I kind of can't get out of my head that I'm still thinking about. I mean, it's now almost 10 years since it came out, so I'm really excited to see the quality of this port. And I think it's almost a little bit more exclusive in a way, because obviously we were talking about Bayonetta the other day. It's had a whole multitude of ports to various console systems, but this is something different, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's only appeared on 3 other platforms before this new conversion, and it's a more demanding game overall. But it was also sort of a redemption story for the PlayStation 3, I believe. I think you did the original coverage even, but it still has issues on that platform. But compared to what happened with Bayonetta, it was very close to the Xbox 360 version, and in some ways it argues superior as they engaged VSync on that version.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking back at the footage now, and it's quite interesting to see that sometimes the PlayStation 3 is faster, sometimes it's slower, but both Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 had issues maintaining 30 frames per second, so not the 60 that Platinum aimed for with Bayonetta. This was a much more ambitious game, and I thought it was brilliant back in the day. I absolutely loved it. I thought the PC port superb because it addressed the performance issues. But we've been kind of, I don't know, we've had this, the game's been kind of elusive on other consoles. So yeah, this one, I'm really fascinated to see what's going on with it.
Yeah, so I guess, first of all then, it's the same team, or porting studio at least, that brought Bayonetta, since it's part of the same package. And so I guess, unsurprisingly, some of the choices made on PS4 and Xbox are similar. So resolution, of course. It is 1440p, once again, on the enhanced consoles. So that's both Xbox One X and PS4 Pro. While the base consoles get 1080p.
Now, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because I think we were talking about how Bayonetta was kind of unambitious as a port for the current gen systems, but that was targeting 60 frames per second in its original incarnation, whereas Vanquish struggled to hit 30, and they're still aiming for 60 on the PS4 and Xbox One. So yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot more to say about that when we get to the performance section, because that is it's interesting. But I guess the first thing I want to talk about are the actual visuals and the options associated with them. So as we established last time, Bayonetta on these new consoles didn't really employ any of the new features that were added to the PC version. So no MSAA, no ambient occlusion, things like that. Now Vanquish was slightly different. It did not have MSAA. It had an edge filtering of varying qualities, and it had FXAA, but it did allow ambient occlusion and a few other options. And in comparing that version with the console version, so ambient occlusion is missing once again, though it's not a huge loss because it's the type that's it's like a fine black outline around objects that doesn't really look great, so I'm not sure that its loss is a big deal here. And then secondly, there's the shadows, and this is, I don't know if you've seen this for a while, but the shadow map resolution in Vanquish was always really low. And the way they display the shadows is pretty nasty. So even on PC with the highest res shadows, the edges of the shadows are extremely ragged and sort of just, they don't look great. And that is still the case here, but they're much lower res. And there's points where, especially on PlayStation, it just looks like a bunch of chunky pixels. Very difficult to make out any smooth shadows there. So that's one area where I would have liked to have seen improvements, but they did not improve it.
You're saying especially on PlayStation there. Does that apply to Xbox as well?
So that's interesting. This is unexpected. So the PlayStation and PC versions display shadows in a very similar way, but On Xbox, while they are still very low res like PlayStation, the character shadows and some of the other shadows display differently. They're much more transparent. Whereas on PlayStation, they look very stark black with harsh outlines. On Xbox, they're a little bit less so and less defined. So in the end, it actually ends up looking a lot nicer, I think, overall. But, when there are the harsh shadows, they all look kind of the same. But the character shadows and some of the softer shadows, they do display better on the Xbox side.
It's kind of curious, isn't it? Because back in the day, in the last gen era, shadows were often displayed in different ways because they had very different GPUs. But this generation, essentially it is the same family of graphics technology. So the concept of there being differences like that's kind of baffling.
Yeah, I agree. I was surprised to see that. I figured they would be identical, but no, that is not the case. And there is, of course, another difference, the gamma difference. As was the case with Bayonetta, the game is darker on Xbox. Quite a bit so, in fact.
Yeah, I noticed that when I actually saw your Bayonetta video rendered out. I was kind of surprised at how stark the difference is in some cases.
Yeah, and it's the same here. I mean, it's to the point where I was like, wait, is the limited RGB switch truly enabled here? And sure enough, I mean, the Xbox is outputting as always. It's just this specific version is very dark comparatively. So you do lose a lot of shadow detail.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the PC version still used the original last gen assets, right? And I guess it would be the same on this one?
Yeah, there hasn't been any asset changes from there, and textures look surprisingly good actually most of the time. Like in this scene, you see, if you just look at the pavement texture used on the ground here, it's surprisingly sharp. So I really don't have a lot of complaints about the texture detail. And in fact, the scenes as a whole are really ambitious with that they sort of have this sort of halo design to the world where the whole city wraps around in a donut shape. So you kind of see a lot of buildings and structures far off into the distance sort of twist around your viewpoint. And that stuff looks really good still today. And it does look great in higher resolution compared to those original versions of the game.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about just the sheer quality that goes into the art of many games, and they do stand up across the generations. And yeah, as I said earlier, I've been kind of thinking about this game, its longevity, why I'm still thinking about it even now. And I think a lot of it is because, well, both you and me are massive Sega fans from back in the day, and the art of the kind of classic Sega arcade shooter kind of disappeared with the end of the Dreamcast. But this, it kind of felt very much to me like a Sega game, even though Platinum were obviously at the helm for this one. Just felt and looked like a Sega game to me, and the fact that it actually came from Sega, awesome.
That is an interesting comparison, and I kind of agree. That is, it does have that look to it. There's something about those mecha designs and the suits and some of the areas. It does have a really cool design to it that holds up nicely. But I'll tell you what doesn't hold up that well.
I can see this one coming.
The FMV sequences.
Yep.
Those darn things. So they decided to tell the story using pre-rendered FMVs, which is different from Bayonetta, which is almost entirely real-time. Here, they use these videos to tell that story between each act or whatever. And they don't look great. I mean, they're very obviously much lower resolution than the game itself. There's compression artifacts. I mean, you can see that they've tried their best to do what they could with those assets, but the quality just isn't there. And so, the biggest issue really, though, is the playback. The playback is sort of juddery. It just doesn't look very smooth as the cutscenes play out. So you have these juddery, low-res FMVs. It's not great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering what we can do about this, because it comes up with so many of the remasters. Maybe the solution is, there's a lot of advances going on in machine learning, and maybe it is going to be the case that in future we'll see upscaling of original assets to HD, UHD using machine learning. I think that's probably the way forward, because I'm assuming that they wouldn't be able to re-render out all of those original cutscenes, and they probably have very limited original assets.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's just, they did what they could, but AI learning might actually be a future option for this sort of thing. I would like to see that come to pass.
But yeah, I do feel that this does have the spirit of Sega, the sort of spirit of a Sega arcade machine about it. But what definitely wasn't Sega-like about the game originally was the performance level, which was, for a start, 30 frames per second capped, and obviously it dipped way beneath that when things really went insane. So obviously the intent here is to hit 60. So how do we achieve that? How well does it hold up?
Well, let's start at the top, and that's Xbox One X. Unsurprisingly, that is the smoothest of the bunch, targeting a conservative 1440p. I found that throughout it pretty much holds a locked 60 just about all the time. There are going to be some minor dips here and there, but for all intents and purposes, it's basically a locked 60 FPS, and this is as optimal a version to play as you could ask for. It feels good, it's very stable, it's great. So no problems there on Xbox One X. PS4 Pro, though, is a little bit strange. So, first of all, there are actually 2 display modes, and this is also true of Bayonetta, I later discovered, but it's the same here as well. Basically, in 4K mode, you get 1440p. In 1080p mode, you get 1080p. Now, in 1440p mode, the game is less stable than Xbox One X, but it's not bad. Most of the gameplay feels pretty locked. But you are going to get some additional dips, especially when there's a lot of alpha effects being thrown around near the camera. So that can trigger some very slight slowdown. But what I found really strange is that these first-person visor segments, which sort of come up, it's equivalent to the Gears of War slow walking scenes. You know, they love to do this. But every time that pops up, the frame rate drops into the mid-50s and just sort of hangs there the entire time until that scene is finished. And I don't understand what it's displaying or what's going on there that would cause that. But clearly, the PS4 Pro GPU doesn't like it at 1440p.
Wow, that's kind of baffling, isn't it?
It is.
But it is solved if you output the console at 1080p.
Yep, it's completely solved, and we get a smooth 60 FPS, and in fact, a lot of the little performance quirks are smoothed out. So it is possible to get that very stable performance. But honestly, the 1440p mode is mostly good enough. It's really just those first-person sequences that stand out.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Well, if the Pro is having issues at 1440p, I guess the obvious question from there is where this leaves the base consoles.
So this is where it gets strange. So on base PS4, the average performance level in 1080p is lower than the 1440p mode on Pro. There are more pockets of slowdown, even right here at the very beginning of the game, just sitting around, like watching the battle unfold. I mean, we're getting these little dips. It just can't quite hold to a locked 60. And I won't say this is a huge problem, because as you really start to play the game, you can see that it does mostly hit that 60 FPS mark, but anytime an explosion occurs near the camera or some sort of big action happens around the player, you're going to see these dips. So it isn't perfect. But what's strange is that the visor scenes don't have that issue. So they run flawlessly at 60 FPS, unlike the Pro and 1440p.
Wow. I was going to suggest maybe there was some kind of bandwidth issue for the visor sections on the Pro. That might make sense. But if you're getting dips on explosions on base PlayStation 4, then that would also suggest a bandwidth issue. I don't know. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
It is, and it gets weirder when you bring Xbox One S into the equation, because on that system, the visor is also fine.
And that's a system that definitely does have bandwidth issues, because most of the RAM is DDR3.
It definitely does. And outside of the visor, though, that's when you really see those problems, because this version does run the worst of all. And again, it's not terrible by any means, but I definitely noticed it cropping up a lot during gameplay. In many of the major battles, you just get these little pockets where it kind of falls into the 50s and it hangs there for a bit until you eliminate enough enemies, and then it sort of pops back up to 60. So, I can't say it's bad exactly, but it is definitely the worst performing version overall, except for when it comes to those visor sequences, which again, not a huge deal, because you're not really playing the game that much at that point. It's just, I found that really strange that the Pro has issues with that specific graphical effect.
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it? But on a sort of general level, I really don't like these PlayStation 4 Pro games that lock performance modes to output resolution on the front end of the console. Because, let's say I'm playing the game on a 4K screen and I want an absolutely locked 60 frames per second in preference to 1440p resolution. I've got to physically go to the front end of the console and change the resolution in order to access that. Just doesn't make sense to me. I'm just sort of baffled by why this is still happening.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing, and I hope it's something we can leave behind with the PlayStation 5, because this whole UI issue with changing resolutions is really not optimal at all.
Yeah, definitely. So anything more to say about this one? Because, I don't know, I guess a more challenging port, and obviously the results are a bit more variable. And last time around there wasn't really much to separate either the base or the enhanced machines, but this time there does seem to be much more of a clear pecking order.
Yeah, for sure. The Xbox One X is the best version of the lot, by far, I'd say. But the other versions are all good as well. Obviously, Pro is number 2, and the others, they have their issues. I won't say any of them are poor. I think the performance is more than acceptable in most cases, but so I think people will be happy with it. But yeah, the Xbox One X is definitely the best version of the bunch. I guess it just has enough extra GPU muscle to sort of power through those issues. I kind of wonder if they had targeted native 4K on that system, if it would actually be the reverse and would be seeing more issues.
The resolution situation kind of makes a lot more sense this time around because they are doubling frame rate as well, or at least trying to double it. So yeah, it does sort of make sense to go for 1440p. But still, yeah, interesting results overall, I'd say.
Yeah, and like I said, still a fantastic game, well worth playing. It's one of those games where when you first pick it up after a long hiatus, it's difficult to even remember how to play, because it is a very complex, nuanced sort of experience with a ton of freedom in terms of how you approach each scene, and that's what I love about it. It's a lot of fun to play and master and get back into. It has a ton of depth.
This is what I really liked about the game, is that it is an exercise in actually mastering the mechanics to get the most out of the game. You can't be a content tourist on this because, if you're just in it to see what the game delivers in terms of levels and enemies and whatnot, you can be finished with it in 5 hours, but that's not the point of this game. The point is to explore the mechanics, to build skill, to pull off these amazing moves, these awesome pyrotechnics. And that's, I guess, why I'm still pumped about this game 10 years on.
Yeah, and for people watching the video, regardless of which platform you own, I do think it's still worth picking up. It's a great game, and hey, you get Bayonetta with it as well. They're both excellent, so
good stuff.
But I think that's going to do it for this video for now, so thanks for joining me once again, Rich.
No, it's been a pleasure to revisit this one. I mean, I really hope people pick it up. I mean, I'd love to see a sequel one day. I guess the chances are quite remote, but I live in hope.
Yes, someday. We can only hope. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to give us a like and subscribe. Come check out the video on the DF Patreon, of course, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John and Rich signing off.